The morning the assignment landed on my desk, I should have felt proud. Fortune 100 client, a logistics empire bleeding millions, the kind of contract that could change a career. Instead, the folder Claudine Mercer slid toward me felt less like an opportunity and more like a verdict. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "You'll handle the framework, keep it tight, no fluff." I nodded, because that's what you do when your VP gives you marching orders. I opened the project brief, scanning timelines, deliverables, revenue targets. It was brutal 3 weeks to design an overhaul of systems so outdated they could have been museum pieces. My pulse raced with equal parts dread and exhilaration. This was the kind of problem I lived for. Then the kickoff email arrived. My inbox pinged, and I clicked, ready to see my name attached to something that mattered. The subject line glowed, Translog Project Core Team. I skimmed the list of recipients once, then again, slower this time. My heart stuttered. My name wasn't there. Everyone else was listed analysts, junior consultants, even an intern who started last month. But not me. I reread the email until the words blurred. Finally. I walked to Claudine's glass-walled office. She was laughing into her headset, some partner on the other line. When she hung up, I asked carefully, "There seems to be a mistake. My name isn't on the roster." She barely glanced up. "Probably just a glitch. Don't worry about it. Focus on the work." Her tone was sugar-laced dismissal, the kind that made you feel childish for even asking. I stood there, waiting for her to acknowledge what we both knew, that it wasn't a glitch at all. But she'd already turned back to her screen, scrolling like the conversation had ended. I returned to my desk, jaw tight, hands trembling over the keyboard. The message was clear: I would do the work, but I wouldn't exist. My name had been erased before the project even began. I closed the email, opened a new file, and began mapping out the system overhaul. If they wanted a ghost, I'd build a shadow so strong it couldn't be ignored. The first night, I stayed late. The office windows reflected back an empty city skyline. I sat surrounded by stacks of quarterly reports and system audits that looked like they belonged in a history museum. Translog's backend was a tangle of legacy code and duct-taped fixes. Their warehouses still logged orders in systems that crashed if you used certain browsers. It was like trying to modernize a dinosaur without breaking its bones. By midnight, my desk was covered in sticky notes and cold coffee. I combed through vendor contracts, dug into financial filings, even lurked on Reddit threads where anonymous warehouse managers vented about outages that left pallets stranded. I built the model piece-by-piece operational choke points, revenue leakage, phase-by-phase ROI. Every hour I lost, the project gained another layer of clarity. Meanwhile, Claudine's calendar was a parade of working lunches and cocktail hours. Her voice echoed through the halls whenever she returned, high and bright, rehearsing sound bites like weapons. She hadn't opened a single spreadsheet, but she was already rehearsing her victory lap. One afternoon, Irene Salcedo drifted by my desk, eyes flicking over the mess of charts and simulations. She leaned close, lowering her voice. "Careful, you're running yourself into the ground." "I don't have a choice," I muttered, scribbling another note. She hesitated, then added, "Pick your battles. Selena, Claudine's slippery. If you hit her head on, she'll slide right past you and leave you holding the mess." I forced a small smile, but her words landed heavier than she knew. I'd been swallowing my anger for weeks, burying it under numbers and diagrams, telling myself the work would speak for me. But the silence was beginning to feel like complicity, like I was helping erase myself. That night, as the office lights clicked off one by one, I stayed hunched over my laptop, refining the framework. I told myself if I built something undeniable, I'd earn my place in the room. But even as I typed, the thought lingered, What if silence was the very thing that kept me out? 2 weeks in, the deck was finished. 70 slides, 3 annexes, a roadmap so detailed it could have doubled as a survival guide, every number cross-checked, every chart sharpened until it cut like glass. I had poured myself into it, nights and weekends dissolving into spreadsheets and simulations, my fingerprints on every layer of logic. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. Claudine appeared at my desk just as I was saving the final version. She leaned on the corner with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Great work," she said, taking a long sip from her cold-pressed juice. "I'll take it from here." I blinked. "You mean for the client meeting?" Her smile widened. "Of course. You're the ghostwriter. Selena. I'm the face. That's how this works." The word hit harder than I expected. Ghostwriter. As if I were some faceless hand, scribbling words for a puppet. My chest tightened, heat rushing to my ears. I thought I'd be in the room. I managed. She straightened, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "You won't. Too many people at the table already. Stay here and prep the Westmont project. And please, run spell check this time." She dropped the printed deck onto my desk with a soft thud, then turned and walked away. Humming, I stared at the stack of pages. My work, my nights, my name erased again. I wanted to shout after her, to tear the deck in half, to make a scene that couldn't be ignored, but I didn't move. Not yet. Instead, I slid the top page aside, tracing the logic I'd built. If they wanted me to be a ghost, then I would haunt the room they tried to lock me out of. They'd hear me whether I was there or not. I reopened the file and began to think differently. Not like a strategist solving a problem, but like an architect laying traps. That night, I opened the deck again. But this time, I wasn't polishing. It was war. I started layering in questions only I could answer, the kind that looked harmless on paper but carried razor edges if anyone pushed. Slide 9 contained a reference to a sandbox simulation I had built on my own, something invisible unless you knew where to look. Slide 14 tied vendor velocity to market exits, a connection no one else would think to challenge unless they did. And then only I could explain the thread. It wasn't sabotage. I wanted the work to stand. But if someone tried to parade it as their own, the cracks would show. The room would notice when the echo couldn't explain the voice. When I finished, I saved the file and sent it to legal with a bland subject line for archival compliance. A quiet breadcrumb time-stamped, logged, impossible to erase. The following morning, Irene found me at the coffee machine. Her tone was low, careful. "You should know Claudine's already drafted a press release. Full spread, industry journal. She's claiming authorship of the new framework. Says it's her brainchild." The words hit like ice water, not content with stealing the pitch. She was rewriting history before it happened. I set down my cup, steadying my hands. She hasn't even presented yet. Irene's eyes were sympathetic but resigned. She doesn't need to. Once it's in print, the story sticks. People will remember her name, not yours, all day. I carried those words like a weight. The work was no longer just about solving Translog's problems. It was about preserving my existence. If Claudine won this round, my years of sacrifice would dissolve into her biography. So I returned to my desk, pulled the deck back onto my screen, and went deeper. Every diagram became not just a solution, but a signature. I made sure the bones of the model were mine alone, built on details that couldn't be faked. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, I knew the pitch was no longer hers to give, it was mine to haunt. The morning of the pitch felt heavier than any deadline I'd ever carried. Claudine had flown to Chicago the night before, posting a photo of her crimson blazer laid out on a hotel bed with the caption, "Power Day." My deck, my voice, reduced to a prop in her costume. I sat at my desk in Manhattan, the office unusually hushed. My inbox was open, refresh button glowing like a lifeline. Every vibration of my phone sent my pulse jumping. Somewhere, several states away, my work was being paraded as hers. At 10:03 a.m., I pictured them filing into the high-rise boardroom Adrian Voltaire, the CEO with a reputation for slicing through fluff like a scalpel, the COO, notorious for drilling one layer deeper than anyone expects, and a row of sharp-eyed executives who measured every word against millions in losses. Claudine would be walking in with her leather binder, my binder, rehearsed smile locked into place. I leaned forward over my laptop, opening the master file again. Every slide stared back at me like a secret code. I had stitched them with precision, each transition tight enough to survive scrutiny, but seeded with questions Claudine couldn't answer. My hand hovered over my phone, tempted to text Irene. If they ask about slide 14, she's finished. But I didn't. The trap had to spring on its own. By 11, no messages had arrived. The silence was suffocating. I tapped my pen against the desk, imagining Claudine gliding through the first slides, reciting buzzwords like a hymn. I imagined Adrian's expressionless stare, the room waiting for substance that never came. When noon passed with no word, I stood, pacing the corridor, every step syncing with my heartbeat. Then my phone buzzed once, an email notification flashing across the screen from legal requesting confirmation of the source file and metadata for translog presentation. I froze, air caught in my lungs. That wasn't routine. That was a signal. The pitch room had cracked open, and the echoes were already reaching New York. The first email from legal hadn't even faded from my screen when the second one arrived short, clipped, requesting metadata attached to slide 14. My chest tightened. Slide 14 was the landmine. Later, Irene slipped by my desk, her voice barely a whisper. Word from Chicago, it got messy. I gripped my pen as she explained. Adrian Voltaire had been silent through most of Claudine's presentation, face unreadable as she marched through the slides with her usual glossy confidence. Then, halfway down the deck, he raised a hand. Slide 14, he said. His voice was flat, controlled, the kind that made an entire room lean forward. Walk me through the vendor velocity assumption. The details were simple to me. I had built that model out of 12 market inputs, simulation logs, and cross-benchmarks from 3 competitors. Every number had a spine, every connection had a reason, but Claudine hadn't bothered to understand any of it. Irene said the silence stretched, and Claudine's smile faltered. She stammered, flipping through her notes. Finally, cornered. She said the words that detonated the trap. It's more of a placeholder. The room froze. Adrian's reputation was built on annihilating vagueness. He had once cut off a vendor mid-sentence for using synergy unironically. Now, in front of his board, the woman claiming ownership of the strategy had admitted she was bluffing. Adrian closed his notebook without a word. That single gesture carried more weight than shouting. Claudine's confidence collapsed like glass under pressure. The executives began to murmur. Even Victor Dalmont, who had sat stoic at the edge of the table, shifted uncomfortably. In that instant, everything I had built no longer belonged to her performance. It was mine again, beating beneath the surface, waiting to be called forward. By the time Irene finished telling me, my phone was already buzzing with a new calendar invite follow-up call with Translog CEO mandatory attendance. The mask had slipped, and the silence was demanding someone to break it. The call came in fragments, whispers from Irene, half-heard reports traveling faster than the official updates, but the line that reached me clearest was Adrienne Voltaire's voice, carried back like a verdict. We don't deal with worthless echoes. Where is the real creator? I pictured the scene as if I'd been sitting there. Claudine clutching her leather binder tighter, her mouth half open, scrambling for some recovery that wouldn't come. Victor Dalmont, the SVP, seated a few chairs away, stone-faced but restless. He had hitched his name to Claudine for months, preferring her polish over my work, but Adrienne's gaze was a spotlight you couldn't hide under. Victor hesitated. Loyalty on one side, survival on the other. I imagined the weight of silence pressing down, every executive waiting to see if he'd double down on a bluff or admit the truth. Adrienne didn't blink. Finally, Victor's jaw tightened, and he gave the smallest nod in my direction, not to me directly, but to the name they all knew had been erased from the deck. The moment his choice was made, my world shifted. Back in New York, my phone rang, sharp and insistent on the desk beside me. I didn't recognize the number, but the subject line of the email that followed confirmed it. Mandatory attendance translog follow-up call. 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. For weeks, I'd been invisible, building in silence, existing only in footnotes and metadata. Now, suddenly, they wanted me. Not the ghostwriter, not the shadow, me. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline. The city looked unchanged, but inside me, something cracked open. The door I'd been barred from had swung wide, not through permission, but through necessity. I closed my eyes and let the weight settle. Tomorrow. My voice would be the one they heard. The next morning, I arrived before sunrise, my nerves stretched taut as wire. I set up in a conference room alone, laptop glowing against the dim glass walls. When the calendar invite chimed, I clicked join and watched the screen fill with faces, rows of executives. Adrienne Voltaire at the center, his expression as sharp as the crease in his shirt. Claudine appeared polished, hair lacquered, voice dripping with practiced charm. She opened her mouth to reframe yesterday's disaster, but before she could spin a single line, Victor Dalmont's hand moved. With one click, her microphone cut silent. Claudine froze, confusion flashing across her features as Victor looked straight into the camera and said, "Selena will answer." For a heartbeat, I felt the weight of every eye. Then I inhaled and leaned forward. Slide 14, I began, my voice steady. The vendor velocity assumption wasn't a placeholder. It was a simulation model, built on 12 market inputs, benchmarked against 3 competitors, layered with facility tier adjustments. I saw Adrian tilt his head, his stare sharpening. "You modeled volatility." "Yes," I said. "We used rewrote data from 2022 combined with carrier exit timelines. That's why the decentralized approach breaks even by month 8 and yields positive by month 14. The margins aren't speculative. They're demonstrated through fallback warehouse geofencing. The silence that followed wasn't skeptical. It was recalculating. Executives nodded, scanning notes, realizing the depth beneath the slides. Claudine shifted in her square, color draining from her face as if the camera itself had betrayed her. She reached for her unmuted mic, but Victor didn't give her the chance. Adrian finally leaned back, closing his notebook with deliberate precision. His voice was calm, final. "That's who we're hiring." No one moved. The sentence landed like a gavel. In that instant, the authority that had been stolen from me slid firmly into place. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands, letting the silence settle like a crown I hadn't asked for, but had built all the same. By the time I returned to the Manhattan office, the whispers had already spread faster than any official announcement. People didn't look at me directly, but I caught the sidelong glances, the quick exchanges in the break room. Claudine Mercer had collapsed in the pitch. Selena Aravena had emerged as the client's choice. My inbox confirmed it. Strategy sessions with Adrian Voltaire's COO. Follow-ups with procurement. Deep dives scheduled with finance. For years. My calendar had been empty of recognition. Now it was flooded with invites I hadn't dared imagine. Claudine's office told the rest of the story. The door stood ajar, her red blazer gone, her desk stripped bare except for a dead succulent and a mug reading Boss Energy. No farewell email, no explanation, just absence, swift and clean. The same silence she once used as a weapon now closed over her like a grave. I waited for the rush of triumph, but it never came. Instead, a strange heaviness settled over me. For every stolen hour, every invisible contribution I had made, I knew there were dozens of others in the building doing the same. Analysts whose names would never make it past footnotes. Assistants erasing themselves in calendar invites, quiet builders who would never be called into the room. Irene slipped into my office late that afternoon, leaning against the frame. Her expression was half proud, half warning. "You've opened a crack," she said softly. "Don't let it close." Her words stayed with me long after she left. This wasn't just about Claudine. It was about something bigger. The machinery that made ghosts of us all. I looked at my full calendar again, each meeting a door I hadn't been allowed to open before. The weight pressed harder, not lighter. By evening, as the city lights glimmered against the Hudson, I knew I couldn't stop at survival. I had been given a platform, and the question now was what to build with it. Months slipped by in a blur of meetings, negotiations and strategy sessions that once felt out of reach. I no longer hovered at the edges of the room. I sat at the center, asked for answers only I could give. The Translog account became the firm's crown jewel, and with it came a title, a raise, and an authority I had never been allowed before. Yet even as the recognition settled around me, Irene's words echoed. "You've opened a crack. Don't let it close." That thought became the seed of something larger. Late nights that once went to salvaging Claudine's shortcuts now went into sketching a blueprint of my own, not for another corporate model, but for a foundation. I remembered every sleepless hour, every dismissal, every moment I'd been told to stay silent, and I knew there were countless others living the same erasure. By spring, the Aravena Institute had a name, a mission, and its first round of funding, ironically, a sliver of the bonus I'd earned from the very deal Claudine tried to steal. We built it to give scholarships for women pursuing business strategy, mentorship for those fighting to keep their names on their work, and training to recognize the subtle theft that thrives in silence. The inauguration took place in a loft space in Lower Manhattan, brick walls strung with lights, the air buzzing with voices of students, colleagues, and even clients who had seen what it meant to be invisible and fight back. As I stepped up to speak, I caught sight of Irene in the front row, her smile small but steady. I rested my hands on the podium, heart calm. They called me a ghost so they could erase me, but I chose to be unforgettable. This time, my name is written in ink. Applause rose, filling the room. For once, I didn't feel like I was defending a place I might lose. I felt like I was building one no one could take away. When the crowd quieted, I looked around the room and saw not just students or colleagues, but a future where the invisible would remain invisible no longer. And I knew this was only the beginning.